The smell is the first thing that hits you when you wake up in a place like this. A smell of damp carpets and someone else's stale cigarette smoke baked into the walls over years of quiet desperation. It's a smell that clings to you, a constant reminder that you are no longer the man you once were. This morning, like every morning for the past year, I woke up to that smell, and for a fleeting second, my mind drifted back to a different aroma, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and pancakes my wife would make on a Saturday morning, the sunlight streaming through the large bay window of our kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. That life feels like a movie I watched a long time ago, a story about someone else, a happier, more naive version of myself who believed he had it all under control. We did have it all, or at least the version of it that everyone strives for. A beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, two incredible kids who were my entire world, and a wife I loved more than I thought it was possible to love another human being. My career was on a steady upward trajectory, a senior analyst position at a respectable firm. I was good with numbers, meticulous with details. I understood risk management, I preached it to our clients. We had a solid financial plan, a diversified portfolio of investments, a mix of stable shares and some higher-risk, high-reward plays in a few promising startups. We had life insurance, a college fund for the kids that was growing steadily, and a budget we stuck to. We were the picture of responsible adulthood, the couple our friends came to for financial advice. We were safe, secure, and happy. The irony is so thick I could choke on it now. The very thing that started the rot was so innocuous, so trivial. It was a simple office pool for the World Cup. $10 in, winner takes all. I'd always loved football, the strategy, the passion, the beautiful unpredictability of it. I did my research. I analyzed the teams, the players, their recent form. It felt less like gambling and more like an intellectual exercise, a problem to be solved. And I won. The pot was only a couple of $100, nothing that would change our lives, but the feeling, that was something else. It was a jolt of pure adrenaline, a confirmation of my own cleverness. I felt like I'd outsmarted the odds, that I'd seen something everyone else had missed. That little taste of victory was the hook, and I swallowed it whole. It started small, of course. A $20 bet on a weekend Premier League match through an online app. I won that one too. Then 50 on a Champions League game. Another win. The money was secondary. It was the thrill of being right, of predicting the outcome. I started calling it my side hustle, a fun way to generate some passive income. I even joked about it with my wife once, telling her my football knowledge was finally paying off. She laughed, thinking I was talking about the $10 office pools. I let her believe it. The secrecy began subtly. I used a separate email address for the betting accounts, a PayPal account she didn't know about. The bets grew larger, the research more intense. I was spending hours every evening poring over stats, injury reports, and expert analyses, time I used to spend reading stories to my kids or talking with my wife about our day. I told myself it was no different than researching the stock market, that I was simply applying my analytical skills to a different kind of market, one that was far more exciting. My first significant loss was a shock to the system. A $500 bet on what I was convinced was a sure thing. The underdog scored in the last minute. The feeling was a cold pit in my stomach, a mix of disbelief and anger. It wasn't just the loss of the money, it was the blow to my ego. I felt full. But the immediate, overwhelming thought was not to stop, but to win it back. I needed to correct the mistake to prove that I was still in control. So I doubled down on the next game. I lost that one too. That was the first time I moved money from our joint savings account. It was supposed to be a temporary loan to myself. I justified it as a short-term liquidity issue, a phrase I used at work a dozen times a day. I told myself I'd pay it back with my next big win. I felt a pang of guilt, a tremor of fear, but the addiction had already begun to whisper its insidious lies in my ear. You're smart, you're in control, you just had a bit of bad luck, you can fix this. The wins did come eventually. Big enough to cover the initial losses and then some. The relief was intoxicating, more powerful than the initial thrill of winning. It reaffirmed my belief that my system worked, that the losses were just temporary setbacks, market fluctuations in a volatile but ultimately profitable game. I paid back the savings account, but the boundary had been crossed. The line between our money and my betting money had been erased. I started seeing our family's financial security not as something to be protected, but as capital to be leveraged for my next play. The conversations at home started to feel hollow. My wife would be telling me about her day, about something funny one of the kids said, and I'd be nodding along, but in my head, I'd be calculating odds, replaying the last-minute goal that cost me $1,000, planning my next bet. I was becoming a ghost at my own dinner table, a physical presence whose mind was 1,000,000 miles away in a stadium I'd never visit, watching a game whose outcome held the power to make or break my week. The small joys of our life, the very things I was supposed to be working for, started to feel like distractions. A trip to the zoo with the kids felt like time I could have spent researching. A date night with my wife felt like an expense that could have been a stake. The addiction was reframing my entire world, twisting my priorities until the only thing that felt real, the only thing that truly mattered, was the next bet. And then came the first lie, the first real, significant lie that changed everything. I had a massive win, a multi-game parlay that paid out nearly $10,000. I should have been ecstatic. But instead of telling my wife, instead of celebrating with her and putting the money towards our mortgage or a family vacation, I saw it as a new, larger bankroll, a chance to play in the big leagues. When she asked how my week at work was, I just said, "Fine." I held that secret, that $10,000, like a hot coal in my pocket. It was the first time I truly felt like I was living a double life. There was the family man, the responsible husband and father, and then there was the gambler, the risk-taker who operated in the shadows of his own home. I didn't know it then, but that win, that secret, was not a step towards wealth and freedom. It was the first nail in the coffin of the life I claimed to love. The sunlit kitchen, the smell of pancakes, the dancing dust motes, they were all becoming part of a past I was actively, secretly betting against. The hole was getting deeper, and I was the only one holding the shovel. The double life became my new reality, a tightrope walk over a chasm of my own making. By day, I was the competent analyst, discussing investment strategies and portfolio diversification with clients, using words like prudence and long-term security. By night, I was a different kind of investor, one who dealt in a far more volatile and immediate market. The glow of my phone screen became my secret world, a portal to a universe of odds, point spreads, and in-game bets. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My nights were a frantic blur of watching obscure South American League games at 3 a.m., my heart pounding with every corner kick, my mood for the entire next day hanging on the whim of a referee's whistle in a country I couldn't point to on a map. I was perpetually exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine, a hollowed-out version of myself. The strain began to show. At work, my meticulous attention to detail started to slip. I missed a crucial piece of data in a report, leading to a minor but embarrassing correction from my boss. I'd zone out in meetings, my mind drifting to the evening's fixtures, frantically trying to decide whether to bet on the over-under or a straight win. My colleagues started to notice, asking if everything was okay at home. I'd force a smile and blame it on the kids not sleeping well, another casual lie that dripped like acid onto the foundations of my life. The financial deception escalated from a quiet trespass to a full-blown home invasion. The secret $10,000 bankroll was gone in a month, a series of bad beats and arrogant, oversized bets. The need to chase that loss to get back to that peak became an obsession. I started to liquidate our actual investments. It began with some of the riskier shares we held, the ones I could justify selling as a strategic portfolio rebalancing. I told myself I was just moving assets around, from the slow, boring stock market to the faster, more dynamic world of sports betting where my expertise could yield quicker returns. I cashed out a small amount of Bitcoin we had bought years ago, a move I explained to my wife as de-risking from the crypto volatility. The truth was, I needed the cash for a weekend of NFL games. The kids' college fund was the next to be raided. I remember the physical sickness I felt as I clicked the button to sell a portion of the mutual fund we'd been contributing to since our son was born. I saw his face in my mind, his bright, trusting eyes, and I felt like the worst kind of thief. But the gambler's voice, now a constant roar in my head, drowned out the guilt. It told me this was a temporary measure, a short-term investment that would pay off handsomely. I would replenish the fund 10 times over with my winnings. I was doing it for them, I lied to myself. I was building a better future, just taking a more aggressive path. Soon, our savings were gone, the investments were a fraction of what they had been, and I was still in a hole. That's when the credit cards came out. First one, then another. I'd apply for them online, have the cards sent to my office address. The debt started to accumulate like snow in a blizzard, silent and relentless until it was a mountain. The concept of a household budget, once my guiding principle, became a bitter joke. I was a man who advised others on fiscal responsibility while secretly drowning in high-interest debt that was growing exponentially. My wife, my beautiful, intelligent wife, knew something was wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it at first, but the signs were there. My moods were erratic, swinging from euphoric highs after a win to sullen, irritable lows after a loss. I was secretive with my phone, angling the screen away from her, quickly closing tabs when she walked into the room. Our intimacy faded, replaced by a chasm of unspoken tension. The questions started, gentle at first. "Is everything okay at work, honey? You seem so stressed. Why was the credit card bill so high this month?" I became a master of deflection, of half-truths and vague explanations. "A surprise expense for the car. A one-time dip in my commission. The market's been tough." Each lie was a brick in the wall I was building between us, a wall she kept trying to peer over, her brow furrowed with a concern that I twisted into suspicion and mistrust. I remember one evening with perfect, painful clarity. We were putting the kids to bed, going through our nightly routine. She was reading a story to our daughter, and our son was showing me a drawing he'd made at school. It was a picture of our family, all four of us holding hands under a smiling sun. It was a moment of pure, simple happiness, the kind of moment that used to be the bedrock of my existence. And as I looked at that drawing, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the betting app. The halftime score of a game I had $2,000 riding on. I couldn't resist. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the notification. My son looked up at me, his story about the drawing trailing off as he saw the look on my face, the distracted, intense focus that was becoming my default expression. My wife stopped reading, the silence in the room suddenly heavy. "What is so important?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "That it can't wait until your children are asleep?" I mumbled an apology, shoved the phone back in my pocket, but the moment was broken. The connection was severed. I was there, but I wasn't. The guilt was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest. I loved my family more than anything, and yet I was systematically betraying them with every click, every bet, every lie. I would promise myself in moments of clarity that this would be the last time. Just one more big win, enough to clear the debts, to put everything back the way it was, and then I would stop. I would confess everything to my wife, we would work through it, and I would be the man I was supposed to be. But the big win never came, or when it did, it was never big enough. The goalposts kept moving. The addiction was always one step ahead, whispering that with just a little more capital, just a little more risk, true financial freedom was just around the corner. The confrontation I had been dreading finally came on a rainy Tuesday night. I had been careless, leaving a browser tab open on the family laptop. She saw it. A betting website with my account balance clearly visible, a pathetic $27 and a history of transactions that ran into the tens of thousands. She didn't scream. It was worse than that. She just stood there, her face pale, holding a printed-out credit card statement she must have intercepted from the mail. It was for a card I didn't even know she knew existed. The statement showed a balance that was more than my annual salary. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" In that moment, looking at the woman I loved, seeing the confusion and betrayal in her eyes, I didn't have an answer. The wall I had built between us came crashing down, and the truth of what I had become was laid bare in the rubble. The double life was over. The lie had run its course, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the life we had built together was about to be swept away in the flood I had created. The silence that followed her question was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a void filled with all my lies, all my broken promises, and the sickening reality of my deception. When the words finally came, they tumbled out of me in a torrent of pathetic excuses and desperate pleas. I tried to explain it, to frame it as a mistake, a miscalculation, a temporary madness that I could control. I swore I would stop, that I would get help, that I could fix everything. For the first time in our marriage, she looked at me not with love or with anger, but with a kind of weary pity, as if she were looking at a stranger who had somehow stolen her husband's face. We talked all night, or rather, I talked and she listened, her expression hardening with every new confession. The full scale of my financial betrayal was laid bare. The liquidated investments, the drained college fund, the mountain of secret credit card debt. With each admission, I could see the light in her eyes dim, the hope she was clinging to flicker and die. By morning, we were two exhausted strangers sitting at the kitchen table where we had planned our future, a future I had systematically dismantled, one bet at a time. She agreed to give me one last chance. Not for me, she said, but for the kids. The conditions were absolute. I had to hand over all financial control, every credit card, every bank account password. I had to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings, and I had to be completely honest always. I agreed to everything, a flood of relief washing over me. I thought this was rock bottom. I thought we could rebuild from here. I was wrong. For a few weeks, I tried. I went to the meetings, listening to stories that were terrifyingly similar to my own. I went through the motions of recovery, but my addict brain was already looking for loopholes for a way back to the action. The debt was a constant, suffocating presence. Every bill in the mail, every strained conversation about our budget, was a reminder of the enormous hole I had dug. The shame was unbearable, but underneath it, a dangerous thought began to fester. The only way to fix this mess quickly was to win. Just one big, decisive win could erase the debt, vindicate my past actions, and restore me as the provider, the man who had it all under control. The pressure at work was immense. My earlier slip-ups hadn't gone unnoticed, and I was now under a microscope. The stress of my home life, combined with the constant, gnawing urge to bet, made it impossible to focus. I made another, more serious error on a major client's account. This time there was no quiet correction. I was called into my boss's office, and by the time I walked out, my career, the one I had spent 15 years building, was over. Losing my job was the catalyst for the final, catastrophic collapse. The loss of my income turned our financial crisis into a five-alarm fire. My wife, who had been trying so hard to hold things together, started to fracture under the weight of it all. The arguments became more frequent, more bitter. She looked at me with a mixture of contempt and despair. I was no longer the man she had married. I was a liability, a walking disaster who had torched their family's security for the cheap thrill of a football match. My promises of getting better rang hollow now that I couldn't even hold down a job. Desperation is a powerful drug. It silences reason and amplifies the siren song of addiction. With no job and no access to our joint accounts, I became resourceful in the worst possible way. I sold my father's vintage watch, a family heirloom. I took out a predatory payday loan with an interest rate that was basically theft. I scraped together every last cent I could find, driven by a single insane idea. There was a championship game coming up. It was being billed as the most predictable final in years. One team was a powerhouse, an undefeated juggernaut. The other was a Cinderella story, a lucky underdog that had no business being there. The odds were heavily skewed, but to me it was a sure thing. This was my chance. This was the one, the bet that would solve everything. I took the title to our car, the only significant asset we had left that was fully paid off, and went to a title loan office in a seedy part of town. I signed the papers, my hand shaking, and walked out with a few $1,000s in cash. It felt like the heaviest money in the world. I knew what I was doing was insane. A small, sane part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to go home, to give the money to my wife and beg for forgiveness. But the gambler had taken the wheel. I deposited all of it into a new, secret betting account. I put it all on the favorite to win. Not just to win, but to win by a significant margin, a spread bet that offered slightly better returns. I was betting our car, my last shred of dignity, and any lingering hope my wife had for me. The day of the game was surreal. My wife took the kids to her parents' house, saying they all needed a break. The house was silent, empty. It felt like a tomb. I sat in front of the television, my heart hammering against my ribs. The game started and everything went according to plan. The favorites scored early. They were dominating possession, their superiority evident. I started to breathe a little easier, allowing myself to imagine the relief, the moment I could show my wife the winning slip and tell her I had fixed it, that I had saved us. And then the tide turned. A fluke goal from the underdog just before halftime. A red card for the favorite star player early in the second half. The predictable game descended into chaos. The powerhouse team was rattled, disorganized. The underdog, smelling blood, played with a ferocious, desperate energy. I watched in numb horror as they scored again. I was no longer watching a football game. I was watching my life being executed in real time. I prayed, I bargained with a God I hadn't spoken to in years. I cursed the players, the referees, the universe. The final whistle. The underdogs had won. The miracle on the field was the death sentence for my life as I knew it. There was no rage, no shouting, just a profound, hollow emptiness. The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a cold, heavy certainty. I had not only lost the bet, I had lost everything of value. I had lost our security, our future, our home, which would surely be next, and most importantly, I had lost her trust, her love, her respect. She came home that evening. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She saw it on my face. She saw the car was gone from the driveway. She looked at me and there was no anger left, just a deep, devastating sadness. She didn't say a word. She just went upstairs and started packing a suitcase. The kids came home with her parents a little while later. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the tension, the finality in the air. My daughter, with tears in her eyes, asked me why Mommy was crying. I couldn't speak. I just knelt down and hugged them, burying my face in their hair, trying to memorize their smell, the feeling of their small bodies in my arms. It was the last time I would hug them as their father who lived in their house. I stood at the window and watched her load the suitcases into her father's car. She put the kids in the back seat, buckling them in securely, a final act of maternal protection against the chaos I had created. She paused for a moment before getting in, and our eyes met through the glass. In that look, I saw 15 years of love, of laughter, of shared dreams, all of it reduced to ash. Then she got in the car, and they drove away. The closing of the front door a few hours earlier had been the sound of my world ending. The sight of those taillights disappearing down the street was the confirmation that it was never coming back. The days that followed are a blur of suffocating silence and crushing shame. The empty house was a museum of my failure, every room echoing with the ghosts of laughter and life. Her scent lingered on the pillows, the kids' drawings were still stuck to the refrigerator, a cruel diorama of the family I had personally and professionally executed. The foreclosure notice arrived, a formal legal confirmation of what I already knew. I was bankrupt in every sense of the word. I sold what little was left of value for pennies on the dollar, just to have enough cash to rent a room in a boarding house on the other side of town, the kind of place where you don't make eye contact with the other tenants. This room, with its damp carpet and stale smoke, became my sanctuary and my prison. For a while, I did nothing but exist. I lay on the lumpy mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling, replaying every bad decision, every lost bet, every lie. The gambler's itch was still there, a phantom limb twitching for action, but I had nothing left to stake. I had hit a bottom so hard and so absolute that there was nowhere else to go. The only thing I owned was my failure. The turning point wasn't a single epiphany, but a slow, painful crawl out of the abyss. I had to eat, so I got a job, not as an analyst, but as a dishwasher in a small, family-owned restaurant. The work was grueling, hot, and mindless. Standing for 10 hours a day, my hands raw from the hot water and harsh soap, was the most humbling experience of my life. But in a strange way, it was also my salvation. There was an honesty to the work. A dirty plate went in, a clean plate came out. There were no odds to calculate, no point spreads to analyze. My contribution was simple, tangible, and immediate. The physical exhaustion left no room for the frantic energy of addiction. At the end of the day, I was too tired to think about anything but sleep. One of the cooks, an older man who had a quiet wisdom about him, saw the hollowness in my eyes. He didn't ask about my past, but one day he handed me a crumpled flyer for a gambler's anonymous meeting in the basement of a nearby church. "It helps to talk," was all he said. I went expecting to be judged. Instead, I found a room full of people just like me. People who had lost homes, families, and fortunes to the same disease. Listening to their stories, I finally understood that I wasn't just a bad person who had made bad choices. I was an addict, and my addiction was the master of my life. I started to talk, to share my own story. The shame didn't disappear, but speaking it out loud, in a room where people nodded in understanding, robbed it of its power. I began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding not my finances, but myself. I learned about my triggers, about the lies my brain told me to justify the next bet. I learned that the thrill I was chasing wasn't about the money. It was about escaping the pressures and anxieties of my own life, a life I had once considered perfect. My old obsession with financial instruments like shares, Bitcoin, and high-risk startups seemed like a pathetic joke now. I had treated my life like a speculative investment, going all in on a high-risk gamble and losing everything. My real portfolio, the one that truly mattered, had been my wife and kids. The love they gave me was the only real passive income I had ever known, and I had failed to manage that risk, the risk of losing it all. It was the most catastrophic failure of risk management imaginable. I started paying back my debts, a few dollars at a time. It felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon, but it was a start. It was an act of taking responsibility. After nearly a year of silence, I gathered the courage to call my ex-wife. I didn't ask for a second chance. I didn't make excuses. I simply apologized. I apologized for the lies, for the betrayal, for destroying the security I was supposed to provide. I told her I was in recovery, that I was working, and that I finally understood the depth of the damage I had caused. She was quiet for a long time. She didn't offer forgiveness, not in so many words, but she didn't hang up. She told me the kids were doing well. She agreed to let me see them. Our first meeting was in a public park. Seeing them run towards me was like feeling the sun on my face after a lifetime in a cave. It was beautiful and it was painful. I was no longer the hero dad who could buy them anything they wanted. I was the man who had to explain why we couldn't go to the toy store, the man who lived in a single room across town. But I was there. I was present. When they talked to me, my phone stayed in my pocket. I listened, I played, and for the first time in years, I was truly with them. My life now is small and it is simple. I still wash dishes. I live in a modest apartment I can barely afford. I own 2 plates, 1 fork, and a handful of books. But my life is my own. I'm no longer a slave to the phantom glow of a betting app. My budget is real, my income is honest, and my debt is slowly, painstakingly shrinking. Last night there was a big football game on the small, second-hand TV I own. The 2 best teams in the league. A few years ago, I would have had thousands of dollars riding on the outcome. I would have been a wreck of nerves, my entire sense of self-worth tied to the bounce of a ball. But last night, I just watched. I appreciated a well-executed play. I admired the skill of the athletes. When it was over, I felt nothing but a mild satisfaction of having watched a good game. I turned off the TV, washed my single plate in the sink, and went to bed. The silence in my apartment wasn't the sound of loss anymore. It was the sound of peace. I lost everything I thought was important: the money, the career, the house, the status. But in the rubble of that self-inflicted demolition, I found something I didn't even know I had lost: myself. The road ahead is long, and there is no guarantee I will ever get back what I threw away. But for the first time in a very long time, I am not betting on an uncertain future. I am simply living in the present, one clean plate, one honest day's work, one small moment with my children at a time. And that, I've learned, is a payout more valuable than any winning ticket. Thanks for staying until the end. Share your thoughts and the country you're from in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to catch more incredible stories like this.